Hi, it's Dave Bloxham once again with Beyond Guitars, and as promised, I have come forth with a video comparing and trying to answer all your questions regarding the differences between an arch top and a flat top Mastertone type banjo. And I've even got a traditional banjo here to show you what the differences are between all of these. So coming right up, we'll get right into it. All right, today we're going to go over finally the difference between arch top and flat top banjos. But I'm going to start with the traditional banjo, and this gold tone WL250 is an example of a traditional banjo that's been upgraded with some modern features. And even though it is a modernized version, it has the key feature I want to talk about. The original old style banjos, this isn't what would be called an open back. Appropriate today for clawhammer, frailing, and folk music, really what it's used for now. But traditionally, a banjo like this would have a thinner rim than the modern bluegrass banjo, and you'll notice it's got all these screws on the inside. Well, these are going through holes in the rim, and they're holding on these parts here called shoes. And the shoes are the anchor points for the hooks. The hooks are what hold tension on the head by pulling down on the hoop. So real quick, this would be the rim, which is the heart of the banjo. The tone ring is here. And yes, this banjo does have a tone ring, albeit not a very heavy one. It's not a heavy-duty tone ring like you'll see on a Mastertone. And then the top part here that holds the head down or puts tension on it is called the tension hoop. So we've got the rim and the ring and the hoop, and those are the key instruments that make up, key parts that make up the banjo that are unique to this instrument. So anyway, kind of a brief history. This banjo originated, the banjo, I don't mean not this one. They say it was brought to the shores of the U.S. by Africans, and that there was a similar instrument that had a lot of these traits. I guess the key parts was probably a gourd instrument, they think, but it was a very, very long time ago. But that is considered to be the origin, and brought to the shores of the U.S. where other people picked it up, and it became one of the most, at times in our history, the most popular instrument in America. Not really now, but it was at one time. And in fact, it got modified quite a bit. The tenor banjo is an example of a four-string instrument that was extremely popular in the U.S. at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. That is, like, say, around 1899. And there was a lot of competition for business then. One of the reasons it became popular was that it was adopted for jazz music. Dixieland jazz incorporates the banjo and makes it an integral part of the band. But what we like today in a banjo like this, a clawhammer banjo you might call it, because that's the kind of music that's usually played on it. Another word for that kind of playing would be frailing. Folk music, that sort of thing. Today it's appreciated for its dark woody sound and kind of that plunky open back sound where the vibrations get kind of muffled by your shirt, your belly where you're playing it. The players wanted it to be louder. It just was not cutting it with, you'd have a trumpet and a drum and maybe more than one of each, and it was getting drowned out. So the companies, and there were a lot of banjo companies at that time, were competing to try and find out who could come out with kind of the winner, the loudest banjo possible. So here are the construction features of a traditional banjo. The key feature that this one has a modern feature, of course. If you notice, it has dual coordinator rods, and the traditionalists would be probably griping about that about now. But the traditional old-time banjo would have a long dowel stick instead, and the dowel stick is actually glued into the neck, a big hole in the top of the rim, and that whole thing would be shoved down in, and the dowel stick would come down to the other end where a screw would secure it, and that would mount the neck to the banjo. Pretty simple. This more modern version with the dual coordinator rods is really fantastic. It gives you a lot of adjustability and a very, very solid connection with the neck to the pot. So a modern improvement. But anyway, that is kind of an aside. Here, what I want to talk about are all the holes in the side of the rim here that accommodate the mounting of these parts that are called shoes. And these shoes are the anchor point for the hooks, and the hooks are what pull tension down to give tension to the head. It's basically a drum with a lot more hooks than a drum really would ever need. But the banjo likes it's good to have a nice even tension all the way around, so they included a lot more hooks for a banjo than you'd ever see on a drum. But otherwise, it is constructed as a drum with a neck on it. So one effort, there are a lot of different efforts by different companies to make the banjo louder to accommodate the jazz players. And, I'm going to start loosening the strings and taking them off here. But we're going to drop this project here to show you the Mastertones. But the Gibson Company was, and still is a popular instrument company. And they were leaders in research and development of louder banjos. And there were several steps along the way. Most notably that come to mind for me would be their trapdoor banjo and another one called the ball bearing, which is really an interesting design. They were kind of floating the tone ring on top of ball bearings and springs to give it theoretically more resonance, but whether that is true or not, I think that wasn't really the answer in the long run, although it was an interesting construction that they used for some time. But in 1929, Gibson came out with what's known now as the Mastertone banjo, and that is a Gibson Company research and development product, and it's a trademark by their company. And it just so happens that Gibson is now not in the banjo business. They are out of it. And so you cannot buy a new Gibson banjo anymore. It's been about 10 years at this point that Gibson has not made banjos, but they are responsible for inventing the Mastertone banjo. And their key goal, actually, in designing it, was to make a much more massive and integrated pot. That is, this whole pot assembly on the banjo, to give it more volume. So they wanted more mass and a nice big chunk of maple, and they didn't want any holes in it because the holes were actually killing tone. And they knew that the open back design was also losing a lot of the sound out the back. And so I got the strings off, and we'll come back to this. But in so doing, they designed an instrument that had changes in all of that, so that they got rid of the holes. And you'll see here on this Mastertone type banjo, all the holes are gone. There are no shoes on the outside. It's a clean piece of heavy laminated hard maple, and then they topped it with a very heavy bronze tone ring to add even more mass to the banjo, to give it kind of a hard firing chamber to shoot sound out. And as a part of that system, then it's a complete system they designed here, not just the few things I've mentioned, but the thing is, if you get rid of the shoes and the holes that mount the shoes, then you've got nothing to mount the hooks to. So to accommodate the hooks, which are required to pull, this is the top here, by the way, so this would go, the head would go down like this. So we need to mount hooks to hold this tension hoop down to add tension to the head. So to do that, they needed a firm anchor point, and what they came up with was this design here. In the edge of the rim is milled on a lathe a ridge, and this ridge sticks up quite a bit. On this one, it's contoured to fit what's called the tube. and the tube stops right up against it. It's got all the holes in it that the shoes would have had, and so they've gotten rid of the holes and the shoes, and now all they have is this tube and plate flange. So the tube is required to stop up against the ridge. The plate was added to allow this to be connected to the resonator. And the resonator, of course, if you saw my other videos, you know the resonator is attached to the flange with 4 thumb joints, thumb screws, and so to take up the space between the outer edge of the rim and the inside edge of the resonator, we've got you know, some space in there, and so the rim, or the flange, which they call this a tube and plate flange, takes up that space. It holds the hooks, and it allows for mounting of the resonator, which is the final part in the system to really fire the sound out the front. And wow, they came up with a fantastic design. This is what's called a 2-piece flange. A lot of people have not seen a 2-piece flange, but this was the original, as far as I know. Now, maybe this is not correct, but I think this was the first one they came up with. And it does a great job at accomplishing exactly what they want. I think that it's probably rather expensive to make this tube, which really is a hollow tube, and they've bent it into a perfect circle and welded it together, and with all the holes in it, and then they had to add, you know, they call it a 2-piece flange, but really this type is a 3-piece. We've got a left and a right and a tube. But tube and plate is what it's also called, 2-piece flange or tube and plate, which I might call a 3-piece. Although I've seen some with a single-piece plate. So there are actual 2-piece flanges out there. So this complete system really did what they want. I'm not talking about tone rings, and the tone ring on this is an archtop tone ring, but it really has nothing to do with the flange. The flange is a different part, and that can be used with either type of tone ring. Later on, they came out with, I think was probably a less expensive design, and replaced the tube and plate with a 1-piece flange, and this is just cast. The original Mastertones had this piece made out of pot metal, which really is the most inferior, crummy kind of metal that exists, and traditionalists like to use the original pot metal flange. I don't think it, personally, and this is a personal thing, I don't think it contributes to tone at all. And I think that pot metal is a pretty inferior material, but there's still, original flanges are still very expensive. Now, of course, the rim has a different shape, ledge, worked into it on the lathe, and that ledge is designed to stop up against the tube and plate, or the 1-piece flange, and that works really elegantly. So now this flange cannot move forward, and it creates a nice anchor point for all the hooks that would hold down the tension hoop and add tension to the head. So they would just go through here. They've eliminated all the holes in the rim, and I think this is a less expensive type of flange than the tube and plate. It certainly is, I'm sure it's easier to make. They don't have to bend anything. They just cast it in one piece, and it's a die-cast material, so they don't have to use sand molds and all that. They can just use a die. So that's just, I'm getting into metal manufacturing, but from what I know, it's probably cheaper to make than the tube and plate flange. So that's what that's all about. The flanges, you may have heard 2-piece flange, 1-piece flange. And today, because Earl Scruggs played a flat top banjo with a 1-piece flange, that is the most popular, and that's mostly what you'll see manufactured today. But of course, I'm showing you some Gold Star banjos, which were copies of the original Mastertone, and they had both archtop and 2-piece flanges. So the very first banjo I saw that was actually called Mastertone was this configuration with an archtop tone ring and a 2-piece flange. So 1929 was that was that banjo. So a couple of things people will ask: what are the differences between the two different kinds of tone rings? Well, there are several differences, but mostly their main function is the same. We've got a heavy piece of bronze on top of a rock maple rim. These rims are made out of bent laminated wood, and they are glued together to form a solid piece, but they're not made from a solid piece of wood. There are rims. The wood rim I'm talking about are made out of solid block wood, and those are known as a block rim, and you'll usually see those on handmade instruments where the luthier, or whatever you'd call him, the banjo maker, has glued together a lot of blocks and turned it on a lathe to make a wood rim. You can see the sections of wood all the way around, but these Mastertone clones don't use block construction. They use that bent wood laminated construction. Otherwise, you know, we've both got really, they both have the same principle to them. They're not that different. They're just a little bit different. One of the key differences that is the main difference is the archtop banjo has two rims. It's got an outer rim and it's got an inner rim, and really when you assemble this and you put the head on the archtop tone ring, you'll see a very noticeable band around the outside. I'm hoping you can see that that is a visible identification of an archtop banjo, and you can always tell one from a distance if you're able to see this band around the outside. Well, that's just a product of the outer rim being a little lower than the inner rim, and that's how it got its name, archtop. It's not really arched, it's flat in the middle. It doesn't play any different than a flat top banjo. Nothing about it is different other than really the tone, and they weigh about the same too. But effectively, what it does is reduce the size of the banjo head that's able to vibrate. This section around the outer edge is dead space, as it's only free to vibrate in the middle, and this section here is just taking up space. So it's a smaller effective area for the banjo head than you would find on a flat top, which only has one edge around the outside, and this beveled chamfered edge or shape to it gives all of this area inclusion into the main chamber, the sound chamber, and you'll notice you do not see any kind of a band or any difference. It's just flat all the way across, and it has a larger effective area for the head to vibrate. So it goes all the way out to the edge of the rim, whereas the archtop is essentially at the inner edge of the rim. So that's about the same diameter as the inside edge of the rim. So they're constructed differently just in the nature of them having two different shapes. The archtop tone ring has a dead air space here on the outside or the front of the tone ring, and the flat top tone ring, this is a snug fit on this one, but I can get it off. I just have to work at it a little bit, and I'll talk about that too. So just kind of observe that this is a tight fit, and I certainly couldn't remove it by shaking the rim and trying to get the tone ring off. This one's snugger than that. So what I want to show you here is the inside of the tone ring. This usually comes off a little easier. I'm getting it. There we go. Okay. Now we can see the underside of the flat top tone ring, and it too has a dead air space because this is kind of an A-shaped chamber on the inside or backside of the tone ring. So both tone rings actually have a dead air space, and I have read article after article and even scientific papers written on the effectiveness of the holes. That's another thing you'll hear about tone rings, is the holes. And people make a big deal out of the holes, but mostly it's used to identify it as a, they'll count the holes. So this tone ring, for example, has holes going through to that dead air space on the back side. And in fact, the archtop tone ring has holes going through the inner edge to the front space, which is a dead air space. So air can ventilate into these chambers, but the papers I've read on it conclude pretty well that the holes really don't do anything whatsoever to the tone. And people may have a completely different point of view than me, and that's fine. But what I've read is the holes are kind of meaningless. But you'll see tone rings advertised as a 20 hole or a 10 hole or a 40 hole, just depending on how many times they've drilled holes in it, which is just taking weight away from the tone ring. So I don't know, however many holes you like, I guess is what it comes down to. But different manufacturers will make different tone rings, and they'll refer to them quite often, as by the number of holes, which to me, they ventilate that dead air space that's behind the flat top. The flat top tone ring is much more popular today. The arch top used to be really the king, and it was a very, very popular instrument. And I love the sound of an arch top. I think it's really my favorite. And that's probably because I've played an arch top for most of my life, and I think they're underrated. But they're wonderful, and they're bright and crisp, and a lot of people think that they are the banjo to have if you're playing outdoors. They really cut through. The tone is a little bit sharper, and the flat top gives you a little deeper tone by virtue of, the chamber is a little bit bigger because that head is going out all the way to the outer edge, and the arch top, it's a little bit more restricted, I guess you could say, because it has a smaller effective head area that is working to move the air so you can hear it. But they do sound a little different. Now, one question most people will eventually get to, I'm not going to put this tone ring back on because that was a little bit of work to get off. But one question, there are two more questions I want to answer here. One is, hey, I bought myself a arch top banjo, and I like it, but I would really like to hear that banjo as a flat top. And that question bothers me because maybe you should have bought a flat top to begin with. But I think my first advice would be, well, keep your arch top and go buy a really nice flat top banjo, and then you'll have both. So there's a lot of logic in that, but I've got more banjos than I need, so you can see where that leads you. That question has come up so many times. Can I take my arch top tone ring off? Sure, just did that. Can I go buy or borrow or steal a flat top tone ring and put it on my banjo? Looks like it worked, but it didn't. The answer is no, not really. There are ways to get around this problem, but it's too tall. You see that space there? The tone rings are different heights. The arch top tone ring is deeper, so the rim, to make up for that extra height, is shorter. It's the other way around. The arch top tone ring is shallower, and so the rim is taller. We'll see the difference between the rims. I don't know if you can see it there dimensionally, but this is taller than this one. This is the flat top rim, and the arch top rim is taller. So a direct fit is not really possible. Your hooks will be too short. The head won't tension right. The neck won't mount because the hole in the tone ring won't match the hole in the rim. You can't do it. There are, as I mentioned, one way to answer that question would be, go buy yourself a really nice flat top banjo, and now you've got two wonderful banjos. That's my answer to it, but there are others, and people who make tone rings have come up with, probably less available today as they used to be, as the arch tops have really kind of disappeared. But there's what's called a conversion tone ring, and so the dimensions of that flat top tone ring are different, and they are the same height as the old arch top tone ring and would then fit your old rim. Now, if the brand of tone ring you want isn't available as a conversion ring, or if you can't find one, or you're just not happy with that answer, the other answer would be get rid of your arch top tone ring, take it away, get rid of your arch top rim, and buy an archtop rim and tone ring from a company that makes rims and tone rings. And now you have just replaced the heart and soul of your banjo. So those would be the three answers I would give. First of all, buy another banjo and keep your archtop. Try and find a conversion ring which has the right height to fit your old archtop rim. And the third answer is replace both the rim and the tone ring. Now, I'm not putting that on firmly because, you know, that is a tight fit. You saw me struggle to take it off. But this is another question. How tight should your tone ring be to the rim, that fit? And as you can see, this is a loose fit. This one is not tight at all. And it's not because it's an archtop. It's just because the rim was cut to that size, giving this a little extra room. And this one was cut to be an interference fit or a tight fit, and it needs to be really pushed onto the rim. And it's not seated right now, but to get it on there, I would have to put some little bit of effort to get it on. But it goes on and off. I had an interesting conversation. I talk with as many banjo builders as I can. And at the festivals that I've been to seminars and gotten all kinds of useful advice. But one day I was milling around and I saw the Deering family sitting around in their booth. And I went and chatted with Janet Deering for quite a while. And you know what nice folks the Deering family is. Those people are really approachable and extremely knowledgeable, and they have a great company. And you know, I've had that experience with many different banjo manufacturers. Tom Neckville, great guy. I mean, just really, the banjo people are the friendliest people, and you can just strike up a conversation. But anyway, I hope she doesn't mind dropping her name, but Janet is very, I mean, she's had a lifetime of banjo building, and so she's very knowledgeable. She told me, I asked her about this, fitting a tone ring to a rim, and she said, you know, back in the 70s when we started out, the trend was really for a very, very hard, bright, loud sound, and we were making rims and tone rings so tight that we'd have to hammer them on with a mallet. And almost virtually impossible to get apart. Well, what that will do is make the rim and tone ring assembly virtually one piece, and it will have its own independent resonant frequency instead of two different pieces. And she was kind of expressing, I thought, she thought that it was nice to get away from that. And having lived through the 70s and knowing the banjos available at the time, I would have to say probably the main influence in the direction of that popular kind of very hard, bright, crisp sound was probably due to the Stelling banjo, which was emerging as one of the best banjos you could possibly get. And what a fantastic instrument the Stellings are. They're very expensive banjos, but they're different. They're not Mastertones. Jeff Stelling invented a system called the wedge fit tone ring, and it has kind of a wedge angle to everything. You can go on their website and see the diagrams. It's really kind of complicated, but the tighter you get it, the tighter the tone ring and the rim are together, and they don't lock together in that these are hard to get apart. They're not like that. They do come apart. And that's my understanding. Now, I've never had one. I'm not a Stelling player, but I think that they may have been the most influential in that tight kind of fit rim to tone ring because they have kind of the ultimate tight fit. And so, as a result, Stelling banjos are incredibly loud and powerful. And I know a lot of players just absolutely love Stellings, and they're just the finest craftsmanship you can get anywhere. But they do have a different sound, and I know also players that have had Stellings and then retreated from that because they wanted to get back to kind of the Mastertone sound. So it's all basically opinion and what you like and what you don't. But so, hey, there are so many good, really high quality manufacturers now. It's kind of incredible. The Gibson Company has run into financial trouble lately, and about 10 years ago they had a flood, and their factory that was building mandolins and banjos got flooded out, and their tooling was ruined, and they stopped making banjos. And there was hope for a while that they would resume banjo manufacture again, but they never did. The mandolins have come back on, I think, a very limited scale from what they were, but their main products really are the electric guitars and the Gibson Les Pauls and the SGs and the 335s and all the variations of the really such a fantastic array of electric guitars that Gibson makes. That's their bread and butter, really. And I would have said that's where they make their money, but they've been in financial distress, so I'm not sure they're making any money. Anyway, these two banjo tone rings, I think we've talked about that enough, but you can identify an arch top by that band, and the flat top is the most common, so you can usually assume you're hearing a flat top, but occasionally you hear that brighter, crisper sound that I love so much, and you'll take a look at it and you'll understand it sounds a little bit different. It doesn't play different. This isn't really a raised head, and it's not really arching up so much. I mean, the difference is so minor. It does make a little bit of a footprint here, but really the edge is a little bit lower on this. I think the center lines up with the neck the same way. And if you wanted to pick up an arch top and then play a flat top, there's zero player adjustment necessary. They play exactly the same. You will not notice it when you start playing one. They don't have there's no difference. So now I want to get back to the traditional banjo, which is the old-timey, the old style for the most part. It has a scooped neck, which is really, I have found since trying to learn clawhammer, which is a completely different instrument than your bluegrass three-finger style. But the scoop I find to be really very nice. That's a modern thing. Maybe one or two people did that 100 years ago, but it was not a trend until the last couple of decades. And of course, the coordinator rods on this banjo. But I'm going to take this banjo apart, and we're going to take a look at the innards of it and kind of go over what the tone ring is like on this WL250 from Gold Tone, and you'll see that it's quite different than the Mastertone style banjos. It actually does have a tone ring, but it's much lighter weight. So let's get started. So now you can see I've got all of the hooks off of the tension hoop, and the head and the tension hoop will come right off. And that is a long, arduous, kind of tedious task to loosen all of these hooks enough that we can take the head off. But I still don't advocate using a power tool. What I've got here is just your basic nut driver, which is like a screwdriver handle, and a 1/4-inch drive socket. This banjo has one of the more unusual size nuts, and the banjo keys for these are hard to find. They are available, but there's a maker in England that makes them. This is a 9/32, which is also very close to 7mm, but 9/32 is correct for this. The only thing that I would emphasize is make sure it's a hand tool, because you want to have the feel. There's a tactile feel to it. No matter what the handle looks like, it's in your arm. And I've been setting up banjos so long without any kind of a drum dial. But I do have a drum dial, so we're going to take a look at that too. So this White Lady 250, or the WL250, has this small rolled brass tone ring on the top, and this is really just sheet metal. It's about like a cheap mirror you'd get at Home Cheapo, and the frame maybe that goes around the mirror, that kind of thing. Just a little chrome trim basically is all it is. It does have a hoop inside of it, It adds a little bit of mass to it, not much, but you see it's just a big wire hoop, and that's I guess to give it a stronger edge, because it bears up against this interesting thing which is kind of unique to this particular model, and it's got this kind of interesting rim here, this part of the tone ring, which is made in several pieces. This does come apart. There we go. Getting some motion on it there. But yeah, it's just kind of a hoop. Now this is the heaviest part of the tone ring, honestly, and it's kind of weird looking. So most open back banjos you won't see with this particular tone ring. As I say, it's kind of this model. But most of them will have at least a rolled brass edge on it, which just gives a nice smooth bearing edge for the head. And then there are some that don't have any tone ring at all. A lot of the old handmade instruments are just wood. And with that in mind, you know, also the rim on these banjos is usually a little lighter weight, and you usually want a plunkier sound and woodier sound. And so therefore I always tune them to a lower tension on the head. So the head on an open back is going to be quite significantly less tight than on a Mastertone banjo. So that about wraps it up. We have dissected this old-time banjo, and then mostly old-time. We've gone over the two types of tone rings, the two types of flanges, and a little bit of history. So I hope some of that helps you in your decision making or whatever, maybe just for fun knowledge. While I'm talking, I'll show you how this works. The little shoe and screw go clear through the rim, and that's the shoe right there. And there's so many of them. All these holes kill the tone they wanted for that Mastertone. But yeah, I'm going to put this back together, but I'll make that another video. So we're pretty much done here. So please go ahead and like and subscribe. If you have any comments or requests, leave them for me in the comments section. I would love to hear from you. This is a pretty new channel, so we're trying to do what we think people want to see. But let me know if there's anything I can do that would satisfy you a little more than what I'm doing. We're going to continue with our restoration project as well. And so like and subscribe. Be sure to hit the bell. You'll get notified when my next video comes out. And return once again to the Beyond Guitars channel.